Welcome to Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo, and today we're kind of live here in studio, and listen, at the end of the day, we're going to talk about what's going on here with this violence. I am not in the studio, and so what I want to do is talk to you today a little bit about the role of the government, because what we see going on nationally is really a disgrace. It's sad. What's sad is a gentleman who was really lost his life. You have good cops, you have bad cops, but I will say overwhelmingly, I believe that 99% of the cops out there are good. You do have 1% probably that are really bad. But at the end of the day, what does the Bible say about the role of the government? You know, that's the key. Well, the role of the government really is to protect its citizens. And what's happening now is you have 7 people dead. Some of them are police officers shot in the head. You have 3 that were shot in 2 in the leg, 1 in the foot. Terrible. You have businesses being looted. Is that really the way this is to be handled? Well, the bottom line is the police officer who killed the African American gentleman who's being is now in the custody of the police, right? And he's being charged with murder or manslaughter. We'll see what comes out of that. But at the end of the day, that's being dealt with. We get that, and that's we hear the voices loud and clear. There's no room, it sounds like, for really was a senseless thing that handled that gentleman too harsh. But at the end of the day, what we see here is a good, peaceful protesters. We want that. That's what America's about. I don't make very conservative, but I also believe, man, you've got to be able to express that. That's great. I stand in solidarity with that. By the same token, I do not stand in solidarity with anarchy. And we're seeing that, and I think that's a problem here. So what does the Bible say about government, and what does the Bible say about the role of the government in terms of protecting its citizens? I could tell you this. The Bible says in Romans 13, every ruling authority that exists has been established by God. It's Romans 13, 1-2. And at the end of the day, we have to understand the government gets its authority from God. At the end of the day, we have to respect that. If we don't respect the government, then we don't respect God. And I think there's a lot to be said, even if we don't agree with it or don't like it. By the same token, the government has a huge responsibility to its citizens to protect them. And, when you read on, it says, human government is a derived authority. Those in authority are described as the servants of God. Romans 13:4. What that means, and it goes on, it says, and ministers of God in Romans 13:6. Those who reject God's authority reject God's authority, who reject government's authority. But you're going back to Romans 13:4. Those in authority, that's the government, are described as the servants of God and the ministers of God in Romans 13:6. What are their primary roles? That's the mayor of New York. That's the governor of New York. That's the mayor of every city. Charlotte, North Carolina, Florida, Miami's governor. Their role primarily, really above all things, it keeps its citizens safe. I'm seeing an omission. And there's, if you know anything about the law, you know that you could be charged for an omission, a failure to do something, just as much as you can be a commission to do something. In other words, if I walk by somebody and I could have saved their life, I could be charged from negligence for that, if they lose their life, certainly, or are harmed. At the end of the day, what we've seen is a great, I think, lack of leadership in a handful of states here. And, you can look at that yourself, but I would say that there's a lot of moral responsibility that is going to fall on these governors and these mayors in front of God, because they have failed to really bring in the National Guard when they should. If the police are being overwhelmed, you need to bring something a little stronger in. That's the power of the government. But the power of the government is also limited. Those in power hold their power because of God. John 19:10-11, it can be removed by God. Psalm 75:7 and Daniel 2:21. Such derived and limited authority is to be exercised for the good of all people. Romans 13:4. So let us consider really 3 ways in which government serves the common good. Number 1, government provides earthly justice and protection. Listen, folks, civil governments act as God's agents of justice again. 13:4, we said that earlier. For he, the magistrate, the government's representative, is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Well, people can say, well, wrong wrongful actions were taken and the man died. That's right, but it doesn't mean two wrongs make a right and you don't go out and kill somebody. It's good to protest. That is a beautiful First Amendment right we have, and that I support that. But to go out and shoot a police officer in the head, 3 others in the leg, and kill other people and run over them with vehicles, that is absolutely not only illegal, it's immoral, and it needs to be, those people need to be punished. Ultimate justice and vengeance belong to God alone. It's Deuteronomy 32:35, Psalm 94:1, and Romans 12:19, 1 Thessalonians 4:6. But yet governments bear the sword. They're the ones, Romans 13:4, to bring justice about to the wrong. It does not mean self-defense. That self-defense is all citizens have a right to protect themselves. That's a God-given right, and it's the Second Amendment of our Constitution. And moreover, our subjection to political authorities is not merely to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of the conscience. That's obeying the government grants peace not only to those in authority over us, but also to our conscience within us. Okay. Also, governments are to act on behalf of the good of all people. Romans 13:4. This is not merely social justice, folks, based on secular human rights. It's essentially rooted in the purposeful and gracious creation of humanity by God in His own image. Genesis 1:26-27. It is right for Christians to seek to influence governments to protect society's weakest members, including the poor, Exodus 23:6, and even foreigners, Exodus 22:21, and Deuteronomy 27:19. And that covers the unborn, but that's a different subject. Also, government creates social space for the display of good conduct. God instituted government to establish order and peace, social space. Not only in judgment is judgment carried out, but also the good of these actions is recognized by everybody. Listen, 1 Peter 2:14, the government leaders should be a terror to good, should not be a terror to good act. Government leaders should not be a terror to good conduct. It's Romans 13:3, because that's like as Isaiah said, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, right? Rather, as the Apostle Paul spoke, would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for your good. Romans 13:3-4. Listen, at the end of the day, Christians and non-Christians alike, we all want peace. That's primarily what people want. They want to live in peace, and they want to live in a safe world. It's right to desire and seek religious freedom as Christians, and it's right for people to seek this, to live freely and to be safe. And I think that at the end of the day, well-ordered social space should allow for obedience of the greatest, the First Amendment, but also the second greatest commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We ought to hear people out, even if we disagree with them. Matthew 22:39, because we'd want that for ourselves. By this such love, the light of the gospel shines forth through God's people, and by God's grace, many will be turned to righteousness. Daniel 12:3. But, in closing, God often serves to sanctify Christians, and that means we're going to go through trials, folks, throughout history. And we're seeing this now: churches burned, Christians being persecuted as well. And I think that when you're looking at things like the obedience to civil government as their appropriate times are both challenges and opportunities to blessings to God's glory, we have to be careful that we are acting in a way that is uplifting to God. So our obedience to God should be materialized in our obedience to government, and that should not be compromised unless the government commands that we do something like kill our child, and that's an act of disobedience. That is not anarchy, okay? God instituted government for his glory. All things exist under the sovereignty of God and serve only the good of the people, but also the ultimate purpose to bring glory to his name. Psalm 115:1-2. So government, too, has been instituted by God, not only for the good of humanity, but also for the glory of his own name. See, we can see his glory, in both the expression and the limitations of civil government, its universality and its sovereignty and temporality. See, God is going to return. When he does, he's going to rule the earth, and he'll be the government. In the interim, I think that we have to be careful that we pay attention to what the government says, be obedient to the government and the laws. And I think the people who are looting and killing, that's just evil. And at the end of the day, they're absolutely wrong. But what we can do and say, well, that's not me, we can make sure we speak out against those things and make sure that we keep our civility. If we don't, you're going to destroy culture, you're going to destroy your witness, and certainly we're all going to stand before God and have to answer for that. That is my take on this civil disobedience. Thank you for bearing with me as I'm not here in studio today. And listen, I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo, and I wanted to do a couple things. Make sure you subscribe and like this on iTunes if you would. Share it with your friends, and make sure you check out our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel will be on Podcast MP3, and our on Podcast MP3 will always be on our YouTube. And so you can listen either way. Catch that on Spreaker or iTunes. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That'll be especially helpful for you. You'll like it. You can see everything is usually on camera. God's blessings to you. Again, make sure you like this, subscribe, and I want to say thank you for tuning in today. Listen, make sure you tune in. We're going to be talking about upcoming things like we're going to be dealing with the end times and pre-rapture. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. This is your Reason for Truth for today.